The morning sunlight spilled over the city like it had no idea what kind of struggle it was about to witness. Outside a small neighborhood supermarket, the doors slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, and a man stood frozen at the entrance as if even stepping inside required courage he no longer had. His name was Idris Malkan, a single father whose world had quietly collapsed over the past few months, leaving him with nothing but responsibility heavier than his own breath. In his hand, he clutched a wrinkled note of cash, his last dollar folded and unfolded so many times it almost felt like it had absorbed his fear. Inside the store, baby diapers stacked neatly on bright shelves seemed almost mocking in their abundance, as if reminding him of everything he could no longer afford for his infant daughter waiting at home. Idris had once believed life rewarded effort. He had worked double shifts at a warehouse, smiled through exhaustion, and skipped meals so his daughter Eileen would never feel hunger. But after the factory downsized and his savings evaporated in rent and hospital bills, he found himself standing in a place he never imagined, choosing between dignity and survival. That morning, he had walked miles under the rising sun just to buy one small pack of diapers. One pack was all he needed to get through another day without shame. But even that single pack now stood beyond his reach. If stories of quiet resilience and human kindness move you, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Corner, because this channel believes in second chances, unseen miracles, and the power of kindness that changes lives when the world turns cold. Idris finally stepped inside, each step feeling like it echoed louder than it should. He avoided eye contact, afraid that even the cashier might read the exhaustion carved into his face. He moved slowly toward the diaper aisle, counting prices in his head that never matched what he had in his pocket. The numbers blurred together, cruel and unyielding. He stood there for a long time, pretending to compare brands he could not afford, just so he wouldn't have to admit defeat immediately. The last dollar in his hands suddenly felt like a joke the world was playing on him. Behind him, the store was alive with ordinary morning chaos. People were buying groceries, chatting about errands, living lives that still had balance and direction. Idris, however, felt like he had stepped outside of that world entirely. He was a man suspended between responsibility and helplessness, between love and limitation. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, her tiny hands, her innocent laughter, the way she slept without understanding the weight of the world pressing down on her father, and then something shifted. A presence entered the aisle behind him, quiet, composed, almost invisible in its calmness. Idris didn't notice at first. But the air felt different, as if space itself had adjusted for someone who didn't need to announce their importance. A woman stood a few steps away, dressed in simple elegance that did not scream wealth but carried it effortlessly. Her eyes, however, were not scanning shelves. They were watching him. Her name was Celine Marwood, a CEO who had built an empire from nothing yet somehow still felt detached from the world she had conquered. She had come to the store without security, without entourage, seeking a rare moment of normalcy in a life that had become entirely too large. But what she saw in that aisle stopped her more than any business crisis ever had. A man holding a single crumpled dollar, standing in front of diapers he clearly could not afford, fighting a silent battle no one else was acknowledging. Celine noticed the way his shoulders tightened every time someone walked past. She noticed how he kept recounting the same small bills, hoping mathematics might suddenly become merciful. She noticed, most of all, the quiet kind of despair that does not cry out but slowly erases a person from the inside. Idris finally reached for a small pack, then hesitated, then placed it back as if even touching it would make his failure more real. That was the moment something changed for Celine. Not pity. Not charity. Something deeper. Recognition. Because she had once known what it meant to have nothing but still be expected to keep going, she walked forward slowly, stopping right beside him. Idris didn't look at her at first, assuming she was just another customer passing through. But then she spoke softly, not to startle him, but to interrupt the quiet cruelty of his moment. She said she would take all the diapers in his hands. For a second, Idris didn't understand. The words didn't fit into his reality. All of them? He had only been looking at one pack. But Celine was already moving toward the shelf, her calm presence shifting the entire energy of the aisle. Within moments, store staff were approaching, unsure whether to question or comply. The order was unusual, but something about her certainty made resistance impossible. Boxes of diapers began filling a cart, then another. Idris stood there completely still, watching a stranger erase his impossible choice in seconds. His last dollar remained in his hand, suddenly meaningless, suddenly unnecessary. He didn't know whether to feel relief, confusion, or fear that kindness this large always came with a cost he couldn't yet see. As the daylight streamed through the store windows, illuminating the strange scene of abundance being gathered for a man who could not afford even one pack, Celine turned briefly toward him. Her expression carried no expectation, only understanding. She did not ask questions about his life, nor did she demand gratitude. Instead, she simply ensured that every box was paid for, loaded, and arranged for delivery to his home address that she had quietly obtained through the store system. Idris left the supermarket later in silence, the last dollar still folded in his palm, now feeling like a relic from another version of his life. Outside, the sun was higher, warmer, almost indifferent to the transformation that had just occurred behind those sliding doors. He walked home slowly, unsure whether he had just experienced kindness or a turning point he did not yet understand. Over the next few days, deliveries began arriving at his small apartment. Not just diapers, but formula, baby essentials, and basic supplies that extended beyond what he had ever dared to hope for. Each delivery carried no note, no explanation, only quiet generosity that refused to demand recognition. Idris tried to trace it back, but every lead dissolved into silence. It was as if someone had decided to intervene in his life without wanting credit for it. Meanwhile, Celine returned to her office tower overlooking the city, but something inside her had shifted. Meetings felt smaller. Reports felt less important. Because in her mind, she kept seeing the same image replaying, a man standing in front of diapers with only $1, as if the entire world had narrowed down to that impossible choice. She began quietly funding community support programs without attaching her name, ensuring that more people like Idris would not have to reach that breaking point before help arrived. Days turned into weeks, and Idris slowly began to breathe again. Not fully healed, not fully secure, but no longer drowning in immediate panic. His daughter's cries softened. Her needs were met. And for the first time in a long while, he was able to sit beside her without the constant weight of helplessness pressing against his chest. One afternoon, while carrying his daughter near the window, Idris noticed a small envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a simple message without signature, reminding him that dignity is never something a person should have to trade for survival, and that sometimes strangers appear not to rescue, but to remind us we are still seen. A special request to every viewer watching this story: pause for a moment and comment below what kindness means to you, because your words might remind someone else that hope still exists even in silence. Idris never learned everything about the woman who changed his day in that supermarket aisle, but he didn't need to. What mattered was not who she was, but what she did. In a world where people often walk past struggle pretending not to see it, one moment of unexpected compassion had rewritten the direction of a father's life. Before this story ends, take a moment to reflect on how easily one act of kindness can become someone else's survival. If this story touched your heart even slightly, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Corner so more stories like this can continue reaching those who need them most, because sometimes, the smallest voice in the darkest moment is the one that says, "You are not alone," and that is enough to change everything. And in the quiet rhythm of that ordinary city, a broke father once standing with his last dollar finally learned that even when the world feels indifferent, kindness still finds a way to show up when it matters most.